Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us to IPRI's webinar. This is a joint webinar with the Embassy of Japan. Shall we begin? Great. So Assalamu alaikum viewers, a very good morning or afternoon, depending from where you are joining us. On behalf of the Islamabad Policy Research Institute, I'd like to welcome you to today's joint webinar with the Embassy of Japan on the subject Afghanistan and South Asia. It's with great pleasure that we will be hearing from a collection of several distinguished speakers today from both Japan and Pakistan. Before we officially commence today's session, may I kindly introduce our notable speakers. We will first hear from Mr. Kenta Aoki, who will speak on the resurgence of Taliban and its implications to Japan and Pakistan. Mr. Aoki is currently serving as Research Fellow of the Middle East Institute of Japan. He is an expert principally focused on Afghanistan, where he has worked for 7 years with various institutions. We will then hear the remarks of Mr. Ryoki Kasai, visiting researcher at Center for South Asian Studies. As an expert on international relations of South Asia, Mr. Kasai has been teaching university courses pertaining to the subject. He will speak on Japan's efforts in South Asia in the age of SDGs, Pakistan's development potential and geostrategic opportunities, and Japan's role in Pakistan's comprehensive development. We will also hear today from Ambassador Durrani. Mr. Ambassador Durrani Asif Durrani is currently serving as Senior Research Fellow at IPRI and formerly with the Pakistan Foreign Service for 32 years and has served as ambassador in Iran and UAE. Ambassador Durrani will speak on post-Taliban Afghanistan. We are also joined by Dr. Maria Effendi. Dr. Effendi is currently Assistant Professor of Peace and Conflict Studies at the National Defense University in Islamabad. She will speak on Pakistan-India relations and Kashmir. We will then hear the remarks of Mr. Rafiullah Kakar, who will speak on regional connectivity and CPEC. Mr. Kakar is associated with the CPEC VPP unit and is a development specialist from Balochistan. In today's webinar, we will also have 2 discussants, the first of which is Mr. Haroon Sharif. Mr. Haroon Sharif is currently visiting fellow at the Institute of Development Studies. Mr. Sharif has formerly served as the Minister of State and Chairman of Board of Investment. He will be invited to speak on economic situation and revival. Last but not least, our second discussant will be Mr. Abu Bakr Siddiqui, who will join us shortly. He's a journalist and a senior correspondent covering Pakistan and Afghanistan for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. He will speak on tackling the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. I thank all of our distinguished speakers for sparing their time. We look forward to hearing your views. In commencing with the program, I would like to kindly request Acting President IPRI, Brigadier Rashid Wali Janjua, for the opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Maheen. I welcome all the participants on this webinar. Ambassador Asif Durrani, Dr. Maria Effendi, Mr. Haroon Sharif, Mr. Rafiullah Kakar, Mr. Kasai from Japan, and Mr. Kanata. So a very warm welcome. And I'm sure today's discourse will open discussion on multiple dimensions, because Afghanistan issue and its relationship with South Asia is a multi-dimensional phenomenon. So the topic chosen for today's discourse was South Asia and Afghanistan and Japan, Pakistan's role into connectivity, development, and how we see the security dynamics unfolding in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, we all know by now that it's a veritable landmine where there are so many complex problems and no simple solution offers any remedy. Afghanistan is very pivotal to the security, stability, and peace in South Asia. We know that our national security policies orientation has changed from a preference for geopolitics to geoeconomics lately. And in order to realize that ambition and to leverage the full advantages of geoeconomic potential, in simple words, the potential that the geography offers us to derive the maximum economic dividends, that would never be possible unless we become an integrated region. And we integrate our location as a strategic bridge with Central Asia, and South Asia and Central Asia is connected by a bridge that is Pakistan. A cursory look on the map indicates this basic fact. Now, if the region is not integrated, we will not be able to derive any benefits and would keep floundering like the resource cursed nations of African continent who had a lot of resources, but the same resources became their curse. In our context in South Asia, the geopolitics has become our resource curse. So the analogy can be very easily drawn. We all know that this is an age of trade, commerce, and connectivity. ASEAN nations, they are so well integrated that intra-ASEAN trade is roughly north of 25% compared to their trade with the rest of the world. In South Asia's case, it's less than 4%. So with so less regionally integrated a region, and then Afghanistan, which is still coming to grips with its security issues, this geoeconomics dream cannot be realized fully. So in order to ensure that the problems that hitherto afflicted Afghanistan are sorted out, various dimensions need to be carefully explored. And I'm sure that our learned speakers, each one of them expert in his or her field, would enlighten us a lot on all those dimensions. In very simple words, Afghanistan is beset with the problems of political turmoil, which indicates that there's no constitutional stability and no constitutional scheme on which there is a broad consensus in Afghan society. Till the time that happens, we will keep seeing this jockeying for position amongst various factions, and the true stability would elude Afghanistan. Then there is the humanitarian dimension. We all know the projections of WHO, World Food Program, another host of humanitarian aid organizations which keep predicting unfolding humanitarian crisis. And we need a very concerted regional as well as international response to avert that humanitarian crisis. And Pakistan has done its part. Pakistan has been holding conferences. Pakistan has been doing all the necessary advocacy at international fora to highlight what kind of a humanitarian catastrophe might unfold if international community looks the other way. And recognition of Afghanistan is another issue which might take some time, but there is some silver lining as the United States has loosened some of the economic strictures to allow some kind of transactions for humanitarian operations in Afghanistan. So that gives us some hope. Regional countries need to evolve a consensus on Afghan stability because no country is more afflicted with the instability than the neighboring countries. Pakistan faces the brunt of refugees. Pakistan faces the brunt of economic instability. Lessening of trade affects both countries. And we all know that as there is a kind of a political consolidation and the security consolidation going on in Afghanistan, the Taliban still have no control over some ungoverned spaces where the likes of ISIK and Al-Qaeda, they have pockets of instability. And we all know that there are elements who gain sanctuaries and they carry out cross-border attacks on Pakistan, Baloch separatists and TTP. The case in point is is the recent spate of violence after Afghanistan was taken over by Taliban. So all these issues beg some very clear remedies, and we all know that this post-US withdrawal of Afghanistan offers not only the problems, but opportunities as well. How best the international community in the regional countries capitalize on those opportunities and shape the environment so that this rise of Taliban becomes a harbinger of an integrating force rather than further destabilizing Afghanistan as hitherto. I would look forward to very enthusiastic participation by our audience as well. And with these few words, Mahin, I hand the floor over to you and kindly ask the first speaker to start the proceedings. Thank you so much.
Sir. Thank you so much, sir. Right. I would like to kindly request Mr. Aoki Kenta now to please offer his remarks.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Mahin. I am very pleased and honored to be part of this event with Islamabad Policy Research Institute. I wish to express my deep appreciation to His Excellency Rashid Wali Janjar for the leadership in organizing this very important international webinar. I worked in Pakistan from 2007 to 2008 in Islamabad as an energy worker, and I also visited Karachi for a field research in 2019. So I have good memories from Pakistan. And I would also like to thank my colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan and Japanese Embassy in Pakistan. Let me now start with my presentation. I will today talk about a resurgence of Taliban and its implications to Japan and Pakistan. Let me proceed with presentation. Right. Yes. So basically, in the first half of my talk, I will focus on Taliban's policy direction from internal and external perspectives. And in the second half of the presentation, I will try to explain about possible impact and implications to both Japan and Pakistan and how we can assist Afghanistan. Firstly, let me share my basic understanding on the current situation. After the takeover of Kabul by Taliban in last August, Taliban initiated implementing the Islamic governance, while no states have recognized them so far. So the current situation is like a stalemate, or you can also call it like a by default recognition. Since the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, backed by the United States, Europe, Japan, and others, was disintegrated, influence of those countries is fading away. It does not necessarily mean that those countries terminated relationship with the de facto authorities, but obviously the influence is fading away. And on the other hand, Russia, China, Pakistan, Iran, Qatar, Turkey, and other regional countries have more say to the de facto authorities in Afghanistan than before. This is a basic understanding. And just as you may be aware, that Afghanistan has always been a buffer zone. When we look back at the 16th century, you can see a map. It was a buffer zone between the Mughal Empire, Safavi Empire, and Shaibani dynasty, which were mostly Uzbeks. And from the 19th century to the early 20th century, it was a place of the great game between Russian Empire and the British India. Then Afghanistan fought with the British India for 3 times. Then in the second half of the 20th century, under the Cold War structure, it was a stage of the proxy wars between the West and the East. Then after the September 11th, Afghanistan became a front line of the global war on terror. So it has always been interfered by the then superpowers. And this nature will not change, at least in my lifetime span. And I just want to quote some sentences. One is from Amin Saikal, who is expert on Afghanistan. He once described Afghanistan has a weak state and strong society. To understand Afghanistan, this is very important because there has been no strong centralized government. For example, if we look at the a memoir of the Mount Stuart Elphinstone, who visited Afghanistan to meet Shah Shuja in 19th century as East India Company's representative. The name of his account is an account of the Kingdom of Kabul. So it meant that there was a king in Kabul, while most of the villages and the remote part of the country were governed by each tribe. And this hasn't been changed. For example, when Hamid Karzai was inaugurated, he was widely reported he is a mayor of Kabul. So this understanding is both external, geostrategical position of Afghanistan and the nature that Afghan society encompasses. This is, I think, a starting point to understand the current situation of Afghanistan. Now let me turn to the policy direction. As I have seen statements from the Taliban or other non-state armed groups, there were two goals. One is liberating Afghanistan from foreign troops, according to their perspective. So from the Taliban's perspective, they were in power from 1996 to 2001. Then they were kicked out of the power by the military intervention by the United States and its allies. So their goal was very clear, that to liberate their motherland. That was their way of saying. And second point is to establish the Islamic governance. So according to their point of view, that Afghanistan is in a turmoil and in a crisis. So Taliban tries to bring stability and order according to Sharia. These two I can say like official goals of Taliban. However, it is too early to understand their code of conduct or principles only from Islam, because their actions are based on various elements which are listed on the slide. First is religion, Islam. However, mostly Talibs are Pashtuns, and there is a tribal customary law called Pashtunwali. So when United States asked Taliban to cut the relationship with Al-Qaeda in 90s, Taliban refused because they harbored Osama bin Laden as a guest. Also, women's rights. This issue is deeply rooted in these traditions. The third point is war culture, because when Taliban came in 1994, already there had been more than like 20 years political crisis based on the rise of the communists and backed up from the Soviet Union. So without understanding the historical context and religious and cultural and customary background, it is almost impossible to understand the Taliban's behaviors. And also the Taliban have to take consideration like internal cohesion with their own ranks. For example, Sirajuddin Haqqani did made a statement in front of their fighters and families of the martyrdom soldiers that you did a great job, and we will distribute some reward to the families. So that means Taliban is under pressure to get united among their own group. And also, as a governing actor, they have to pay attention to hearts and minds of the people, Afghan people, ordinary people. And also they have to deal with foreign countries, and they have to continue showing that they are in compliance with the Doha Agreement and will not let use the Afghan soil for other countries to pose threats to other countries. So their actions are like mixed with these various different factors. And also, and there's one thing that I can say that their behavior is also constrained or stipulated by Afghan people's like demonstration, and also pressure from foreign countries and the United Nations. So I think that it is not impossible to change the course of the Taliban's governance. Now, governance structure, according to statements from the de facto authorities in Afghanistan, they have a leader, Amirul Mu'minin, and then Prime Minister Hassan Ahund, and 3 deputy prime ministers, Baradar, Hanafi, and Abdul Kabir. Then the Taliban is apparently using the existing structure of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, mostly. And like Mullah Yaqub was appointed as the Minister of Defense, Sirajuddin Haqqani is appointed as Interior Minister. Also Mottaki as a Foreign Affairs and so on. And while Ministry of Women's Affairs was dissolved, and the IEC, Independent Election Commission, was also dissolved. So this implies that the Taliban is trying to implement the governance according to their own belief. So it does not officially deny democracy, but there is a huge distance between democracy and their way of governing. However, it is too early to call their political system as a theocracy because Taliban adopts the 1964 constitution within the teaching of Islam. So it does not exclude some pragmatic aspects or like secular aspects, you can also say. So it's like they have their own vision. However, they are faced with the reality. So their way of governance is somewhere between their religious mission and also the reality. And there are 34 provinces in Afghanistan, and branches of line ministries are activated, and Taliban invites the former civil servants to maintain welfare service of the de facto authorities. Based on the announcement from the de facto authorities, this is a list of some policy directions expressed by Zabihullah Mujahid on August 17th. So they announced general amnesty, and Islamic governance will be implemented, security will be improved, embassies and foreign emissaries will be protected, and no threat posed, asking no interference from outside. Women's rights will be protected based on Islam, and all media activities are allowed under some conditions. And they promises to make it an inclusive government. However, actually, when we see, we follow local media and the reports from human rights organizations. Summary killings are reported because Talibs were imprisoned in Bagram and they were tortured, and there are judges and prosecutors who made that decision. Now those fighters are released, and even though the leadership announces amnesty, there are definitely revenges going on. And also so-called enemies like Afghan National Army soldiers and police officers, they were exactly the enemies of the former Taliban fighters. So on the ground, there are many those incidents. Also brutal suppression of demonstrators. The above right picture is journalists beaten by Taliban, and forced marriages, forced displacement, restriction on travels, restriction on media activities, and women access to education. Actually, Mujahid told media that from Nowruz, they will start education for girls by separating classrooms. So the international community should pay attention to this issue. And also instructing shop owners to not to display women's pictures, and ask taxi drivers not to take those women without hijabs and so on. And suspicion of oppressing ethnic minorities. This is also reported. So to understand the current Afghanistan, I think it's important to see both the position of the de facto authorities and also the realities based on different sources. Right, and on this part, this is policy direction from the external angle. At this moment, Taliban pledged to comply with the Doha Agreement. They are eager to normalize external relations. I listed some countries which held regional conferences like Russia, Iran, India, Pakistan, organized extended Troika conference in November last year. And OIC's temporary or ministerial conference was held in December in Islamabad. And there have been many high-level meetings like Mohammed bin Abdulrahman, Deputy Foreign Minister of Qatar, had a meeting with Taliban leadership. And Tom West, US Special Representative also. And Foreign Minister Chow Shwo also had a meeting with Mottaki, Foreign Minister of Taliban. And Hanafi visited Uzbekistan. Actually, Abdul Salam Hanafi himself is ethnic Uzbek. And Pakistan Foreign Minister Qureshi visited Kabul in October. And NSA, His Excellency Yusuf also visited Kabul in January and agreed on setting up an inter-ministerial committee on border affairs. And this is actually important because there have been some skirmishes on the Durand Line in these days. It is reported that Talibs tried to remove fences on the border. So this issue may well become a hot issue in the future. So I think it's important for both Afghanistan and Pakistan to have a communication channel to solve it through a peaceful manner. And also Turkmenistan, Japan, and Norway have contact with the de facto authorities of Afghanistan. And also Taliban accept humanitarian assistance from UN agencies and NGOs and donor countries. So ICRC and UN agencies like WFP and FAO and IMO and those agencies have in contact with Taliban. And also foreign terrorist terrorist organizations are reported to be still active in Afghanistan. And based on the UN reports, there are still Al-Qaeda, Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, Islamic State, ETIM, and so on. Now, let me move to the implications to both Japan and Pakistan. First, I'd like to highlight the relationship between Japan and Afghanistan. You know, the Buddhism came from the Indian subcontinent to Afghanistan around 3rd to 5th century. And there was a Buddhist culture, as you can see, historical remains in Burma. And you know, Japan is a Buddhist country, so there is a historical bond. And diplomacy through royal families. The current Emperor Emeritus of Japan visited Kabul in early 70s to see the King Zahir. And there was a strong relationship between these two countries on the royal family level. There were 24 Japanese victims in the September 11 attack. So in this sense, the problem or issue of Afghanistan has never been, has always been Japan's own interest. I mean, to prevent the similar attack has always been Japan's interest. So that's why Japan has been supporting the reconstruction of Afghanistan for 20 years. And Japan hosted the Tokyo Conference on Afghanistan in 2002 and 2012. And Dosha University hosted a dialogue between Taliban and the Afghan government in 2012. So Masum Stanekzai of the Afghan government came to Kyoto, and also Khalidin Hanif of Taliban came, and also leadership of Hizb Islami Gulbuddin Hekmatyar came. So it was a very important milestone in terms of the confidence building measures between different groups in Afghanistan. And Japanese ODA for Afghanistan exceeds $6.9 billion since 2001. Many Afghans studied in Japan as foreign students, so there is a human bond. And legacies of late Madam Sadako Ogata, who is a former UNHCR, and Dr. Tetsu Nakamura, who sacrificed. I mean, he did his service to people, particularly in the eastern part, Nangarhar of Afghanistan. And quite a few number, nearly like 1 million people benefited from his project. So whenever I see my friends, Afghan friends, they express their appreciation to Dr. Nakamura. So his legacy is enormous. When we look at trade aspect, Afghanistan has a trade relationship with mostly regional countries. In terms of export, India, Pakistan, China, UAE, and Turkey are the top 5. And in terms of import, Iran, China, Pakistan, India, and Russia are the top 5. So Japan is not on the top of both lists. Right. Then, based on this historical chronology and the facts, it is likely that the current stalemate will continue for the unforeseeable future. If so, humanitarian crisis will continue despite wishes of Afghan citizens. And international communities is in a complete dilemma whether they have to work with the de facto authorities, or also there are strong opinion in their own countries that some of them are designated as terrorists, or they have bounties on from FBI's list. So we should not deal with Taliban. This opinion also exists. So every country is in a very difficult position. And one thing that Japan one implication to Japan is providing safe passage to fleeing Afghans, because there were embassy staff members and JICA staff members and many other NGO workers who supported us during the past 20 years. So it is a responsibility for the Japanese government to support those Afghans who wish to flee the Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. And evaluation of the meaning of the global war on terror for Japan. As you know, this liberal state building was initiated in 2001, and Japan sided with NATO. And now Taliban researched and re-emerged as de facto authorities. So I think it's important for all Japan to re-evaluate the meaning of this war, and also preventing Afghanistan from becoming a safe haven for terrorism. So this is from the first day, this is important to Japan. And while direct economic impact will be limited, as you can see, the economic relationship between these two countries. Implication to Pakistan, providing safe passages to fleeing Afghan. This is same as Japan, particularly this is geographical closeness or proximity. Pakistan will have to accept many Afghan refugees. So this is going to be a big issue for Pakistan. And also possible effect on the trade volume between Afghanistan and Pakistan. So as we saw the figure, the Pakistan's role in terms of the economic sphere is big. So this will affect economies of both countries. And today I'm not going into detail, but these 2 points are important for the security of Pakistan. One is mediation between the government of Pakistan and TTP. It was a mediation by Afghan Taliban, and apparently it took place in Host province in southeast Afghanistan. The negotiation between government of Pakistan and TTP. So Taliban may have objective to do this, but if this works well, this is clearly a benefit for the security of government of Pakistan. So I think this issue needs to be followed up. And possible repercussions to non-state armed groups in Kashmir and Balochistan. Since for example, according to American journalist Steve Cole, the previous Afghan government or Islamic Republic of Afghanistan had some relationship with armed groups to fight for Balochistan. And if that was the case, their movement may change accordingly to the change of the regime in Afghanistan. So this will cause some fluidity in the security in the region. So how we can assist Afghanistan? I will mention 4 points. One is reconciliation. Taking multi-ethnicity of Afghanistan, it is important to achieve national reconciliation. And in my view, the peace talks collapsed, and it is an incomplete project at this moment. and everyone should follow up this issue. And the National Resistance Front, led by Ahmad Massoud, resisted from the Panjshir Valley until the early September last year. However, apparently the resistance went underground. But Afghanistan is a multi-ethnic country composed of Pashtuns, Tajiks, Uzbeks, Hazaras. So this is a most important, I think, task that we all have to pursue. And Japan and Pakistan may have a role in this part. Second point is humanitarian assistance, providing food, shelter, medicine, so on, through multilateral framework is important. However, in the long term, this will not change the Afghan problems infinitely. So I think in some way, the international community should start engaging and dealing with the de facto authorities in Afghanistan. Taking consideration the public opinion in each country, I think this should be proceeded, but cautiously and slowly. And the US, the frozen asset in US, nearly 9.5 billion is a point of contention. And now Taliban are accusing US. So this is, I think, going to be an issue from in the future as well. And the connectivity issue that Afghanistan has a potential in natural resources and agricultural products. And it is important to make Afghanistan self-reliant in economic terms. So Deputy Prime Minister of Uzbekistan, Umar Zarkov, and Hanafi discussed about this railway project from Termez, Kabul to Peshawar. And these regional connectivity projects should be followed up and expedited. And of course, this should be in parallel with a political movement. Right. Lastly, on the way forward, I think Taliban is unlikely to adopt political system based on the was started in the West. However, there is a traditional way of governance in Afghanistan, and there is a way that Taliban is trying to pursue according to their religion. So some kind of hybridity should be sought. And second point is it's important to ensure rights of socially vulnerable people like women, ethnic minorities, disabled people. So this is an important issue. And thirdly, once again, we have to be cautious with possible resistance by National Resistance Front. And they demand freedom and independence and ensuring human rights of all Afghans and all ethnic groups. And, you know, in the spring is a fighting season in Afghanistan. And now Taliban is conducting this clearance operation from in each house. So we don't know. And if this intensified, it is going to be another trouble or potentially another civil war in Afghanistan. And we have to prevent this again. And lastly, as Afghanistan has been a buffer zone in different dynasties in history. So this means that this geostrategical position will give a wider impact on the international order. So Afghan issue is not only limited to this region, but it is linked with other issues in Europe and Asia and other parts of the world. Right. This is a reference I cited. And Thank you. This is my talk for now, and I'd like to hand over to Ms. Mahi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kenta, for that comprehensive presentation. We will now move on to our second speaker of the day, Mr. Rui Kesai. If I could please pass over the floor to you.
Okay, thank you, Mahen, for handing me the host. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone, my friends in Pakistan, and also good afternoon, my colleagues in Japan. And thank you for inviting me such a wonderful webinar today. Well, and I'm also grateful for the wonderful opening remarks for Brigadier Janjua and also everyone who has made today's seminar possible. And also, I am also very much thankful for the Japanese Foreign Ministry, Affairs of Foreign Ministry, and also Embassy of Japan for assisting and also helping this today's the conference. I am Ryohei Kasai, and I am the visiting researcher of a Center for South Asian Studies, the Gifu Women's University. And so I am now academic, but I also spent 2 years in Islamabad in Pakistan between 2011 and 2013, and working for Japanese embassy there. Okay. And well, I had a wonderful time in Pakistan. And later in my talk, I will introduce some of my experiences I had during my years in Islamabad in connection with the topics I will talk. And today, since Kenta has talked a lot about the situation in Afghanistan and also the relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And in my talk, I will talk about several issues, but largely my topic is about the relationship between Japan and Pakistan. What kind of the cooperation Japan can offer to Pakistan, and as well as what kind of partnership Japan and Pakistan can forge in the coming years. Okay, so from now, I would like to share my slides and then continue my talk. So please allow me just a moment so that I can show you my slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and so Japan and Pakistan and the cooperation prospects in an age of SDGs. And there are three different and separate, but also closely interrelated topics. One, Japan's efforts in South Asia in an age of SDGs, that's the first one. And secondly, Pakistan's development potential and the geostrategic opportunities. And thirdly, Japan's role in Pakistan's comprehensive development. I will talk about what comprehensive development means later in my talk. First of all, Japan's involvement in South Asia's development. Okay. And Japan has provided assistance in various ways. Okay. And of course, I can't talk everything here since the time is quite limited. But so briefly, let me just explain what kinds of areas we have provided assistance in South Asia. The first one is infrastructure and connectivity development. Okay. And of course, these days, this is one of the infrastructure and connectivity. This is one of the most important areas of focus when we talk about development and assistance. Okay. Infrastructure here, people often tend to see it as like building roads and airports and also seaports and highways and so on. Okay, and of course Japan has done that. Okay, and also the improving connectivity. Okay. Not only in improving connectivity in one country, but also the cross-border connectivity in South Asia, as well as Southeast Asia. Okay. And secondly, human development. Okay. Of course, this means a lot. Okay. Like, human development here means like, the issues regarding health and, the education and also the women's empowerment and, hygiene and so on. Okay. And next, grassroots granting aid project. Okay. Since infrastructure and connectivity developments and also human developments, okay, it needs a lot of the funds. Okay. And of course, Japan has provided quite a huge amount of the assistance in this regard. And at the same time, Japan has put quite emphasis on the small scale, but also very the beneficial the project in various ways. And this is why we call it in grassroots granting aid project. While I was in Pakistan and working for the embassy, although I was not in charge of this grassroots projects, but my colleagues has done a tremendous work in providing the funds for the villages and educational institutions and so communities and NGOs and so on. And I'm sure it has helped the people's lives in Pakistan, And overall, Japan's ODA, the total amount of ODAs to Pakistan, okay, this is from 1954 to up to March 2019, and it is about the total amount is $12.42 billion. Okay. I'm sure it's quite a lot. Okay, and with this ODAs. Japan has helped Pakistan, and also in the coming years, I'm sure that Japan has also continued to provide much more efforts in this regard, okay, in various ways. And now, the reason why I put in my presentation the title, the in an age of SDGs, okay, because it seems that SDGs has become a kind of the buzzword in today's the global development talks. Okay. And well, of course, it is sustainable development goals. Okay, it was adopted at the UN in 2015, and it covers the years from 2016 to up to 2030. Okay. And it also covers such an wide areas of the issues which not only developing countries, but also developed countries can work together. I think I don't need to explain a lot about this, but just let us look at SDGs very briefly. We have 17 goals under the SDGs format. Starting from number 1, no poverty, and number 2, zero hunger, and number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and 17, and partnerships for the goals. I don't think we don't have to go one by one, okay? But we can see that we can have an idea that this is these goals covers the such a significant and important issues that today's worlds are facing. And this is also not only these issues are not only for developing countries, but also the developed countries like Japan as well. We used to have what we call the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs. Okay? And of course, MDGs has also dealt with similar issues and goals. But it seemed it focused more on developing countries. But now, this one, the SDGs are, covers not only developing countries, but also developed countries. And this is exactly where in Japan and South Asia can work together. And I'm sure that, many of the most issues identified here are quite relevant in countries in South Asia today, including Pakistan. So this is exactly why that Japan has put emphasis on the development in South Asia. Okay. And nowadays in Japan, we have a lot of initiatives and efforts and the programs and projects in order to pursue and achieve these goals. Not only on the central government level, but also the local government level. And also in private sectors, education, like universities and higher education and institutions and private companies and NGOs. Now we are, there are quite a lot of news about the developments about regarding SDGs today. Okay. And now we need to. So what I'm thinking about is now we need to also share these ideas of the SDGs between Japan and South Asia, including Pakistan. Okay. So I will come back to this issue later. And secondly, now I would like to talk about Pakistan's development potential and the geostrategic opportunities. Over the years I spent in Pakistan, I was really touched by the Pakistan's enormous potential, okay, particularly the people's potential. Okay. Well, Pakistan is a country with 200 million plus people, and its number is on the rise. It's growing. Okay. And I also met many, the aspiring and also the talented people. Okay. So, well, I would say that in Pakistan is a country of the people with talent. Okay. So we need to think about how to realize their potential. Okay. And by doing so, and Pakistan can flourish economically. And also, I also touch on the more strategic or political aspect as well. Pakistan is located in a very unique place in West Asia also, and as well as South Asia. It is located between India and Afghanistan and Iran. But not only that, Pakistan also faces the Arabic Sea and also the Western Indian Ocean. Its proximity to the Middle East, particularly the Gulf nations, it gives Pakistan a very crucial place in this region. And already my colleagues Kenta also discussed in detail the Afghanistan. Okay. Pakistan is one of the major gateways for Afghanistan. Well, after the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, well, it gives a lot of challenges. But also, as the Brigadier Janjia mentioned, it also gives the opportunities for Pakistan. Pakistan can play a major role in assisting Afghanistan to help their economy. We have heard a lot of news and developments in Afghanistan since the takeover by Taliban in last summer. And so far, and this is also what Kenta has mentioned, no government has recognized Taliban regime as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. However, there are people's lives, citizens' lives, in different parts of the country. Now they are in the winter, and there are lots of people in need of food and medicine. And of course, there are lots of the international agencies trying to provide relief and assistance. But it is not easy to fill the gap between the real actual need and also the real, what they can provide. So, in Afghanistan, can have lots of the agricultural resources are quite rich. There are grapes and also vegetables and so on. And in order for them to export their products, since Afghanistan is a landlocked country, they need a port. I don't know how much, I don't know how the port in Karachi is dealing with the goods from Afghanistan right now. But this can play, the ports in Afghanistan, ports in Pakistan can play a very important role in providing and assisting the products from Afghanistan for export use. And also not only economically, but also in political way or diplomatic way, Pakistan assists Afghanistan's the current regime to international community. Pakistan, in a way, Pakistan can play a kind of the very crucial conduit between the international community and Afghanistan, delivering, what international community expects or want Afghanistan, and also the telling the international community what Afghanistan's current situation is and what Taliban thinkings are. So there must be a communication between Taliban and international community, and that's exactly where Pakistan can play based on its historical backgrounds with Afghanistan. But in order for Pakistan to play and also realize its potential and such an geostrategic opportunities, Pakistan itself must be stable. Pakistan must be peaceful, and Pakistan must be moderate, okay? And of course prosperous. And this is exactly where that Japan can play a role in this regard for Pakistan. So now I would like to move on to my third section. Japan's role in Pakistan's comprehensive development. When we talk about development and or infrastructure, as I mentioned, as I touched earlier in my talk, people tend to think about infrastructure means like building ports and roads and airports, highways. Okay. Of course, it is what infrastructure means, but I would say that that is the physical infrastructure. There are various aspects of infrastructure. Okay. And of course, there are lots of arguments and academic studies regarding the various aspects of infrastructure. But here today, I would like to touch on the social infrastructure as well as the institutional infrastructure. And that is necessary for that is what is necessary for Pakistan. And together with physical infrastructure and social and institutional infrastructure, Pakistan can achieve a comprehensive development. Okay, so then, and what is social infrastructure? Of course, it means a lot. Okay. For example, I would say the social infrastructure deals with areas such as education, and capacity building and welfare and environment and women's empowerment. And of course, there are more. And education, okay, on capacity building. In my the second part of my talk, I mentioned that Pakistan is a country of talent. Okay? And I do firmly believe so. Okay? And its population is on the rise. And this is something good. But it also raises a question. Okay? Can Pakistan provide enough jobs for the millions of young people who enter their workforce, labor market every year? I know that Pakistan's economy is expanding, and but the question is it, is that expansion enough for, enough jobs for the youth in Pakistan? And this is not only the case in Pakistan, but also, all over the world. But now we are still under the pandemic of the COVID-19, and which restricted or which placed such a huge limit on our economic activities. Even in Japan, there are a lot of people who lost their jobs over the last 2 years. I am not sure the exact the unemployment rate in Pakistan, but I am sure that the pandemic has also hit the economy in Pakistan. Okay. So the question is, of course, we need to we have to wait until the end of the pandemic. But what we can do is the education, and by providing the education for younger people, who will create the future of Pakistan. I'm sure it will give much opportunities in their roles of the labor market, and also capacity building, okay, vocational training. So that's one. And secondly, the health and welfare. And in the last 2 years, we have seen that the importance of the health. Okay, until 2020, we didn't say a lot, in emails or in the messages or in the conversation, stay safe. We didn't say that. But in the last 2 years, almost every time at the end of our emails and correspondence, at least I do, I put stay safe or stay healthy. Why? Of course, we need to be we have to stay away from the COVID-19. Okay? And of course, not only the issue, the health is not only about the COVID-19. We have a lot of infectious diseases. Yeah. And actually, Japan has been working so hard in this field in Pakistan. And one of them is a polio eradication, particularly in the tribal areas. We have been, of course, there are some other organizations working on this topic, on this issue, including the Gates Foundation. But Japan has been working so hard in providing the help in eradication of polio. Okay. And of course, other infectious diseases as well. Okay. And welfare and environment. Okay. So these are the issues, and also, I'm sorry, and women's empowerment. Okay. In China, there is a famous word, the women holds the half of the sky. Okay. And this applies to every countries in the world. And so is Pakistan. Okay. And here, I am very happy to see that there are, several female participants and speakers. Okay. And also it has to be, and it should be a kind of, norm in not only in these webinars also, but also in every paths of the discussions and educations and other, the places of learning. Because I firmly believe that women in Pakistan has such an enormous talent. When I was in Islamabad back in 2013, I was invited to the Fatima Jinnah Women's University in Rawalpindi for a talk. And it was my first time to visit the Women's University in Pakistan. And at that time, I talked about the women's empowerment in Japan. So I introduced the situation and the civil the initiatives taken on that topic in Japan. And after my talk, there are lots of questions and discussions from the floor. Okay. And I was really touched by their very honest and their passionate willingness to learn more, to learn something outside Pakistan. Okay, and this should be not only in that women's university, but also the basis should be expanded more. Okay. So these areas, education, capacity building, health, welfare, and environment, and women's empowerment. So these are exactly the goals identified in SDGs. And also institutional infrastructure. And also it means a lot. But here, I would like to focus on the consolidating democracy and the rule of law in Pakistan. I have witnessed the stability in Pakistan's politics over the years. And again, let me speak a little bit about my experience in Pakistan. Back in 2013, there was a general election in Pakistan, and Japan sent an election observation mission. And well, at the embassy, I was in charge of the organizing their missions, the visit and their activities. And I was in touch with the relevant agencies in Pakistan side, including the Election Commission of Pakistan. And now, and even on the voting day, I also participated in the election observation missions, and also visited several the voting stations. Okay. And also after that, 2018, there was another election which created the current government. At that time, I was in Japan, but I watched the situation closely, and I realized that Pakistan's democracy is consolidating. Okay. So this must be a continuous process. Okay. And also, it must come with the rule of law. And by doing so, Pakistan can grow much more stable and much more democratic and much more moderate. And also, I also would like to point out that when we're talking about democracy, we often tend to see that we often tend to see the elections are the only event. Of course, it is. Okay. The election is the major event, a major political event, and also the success of the election can lead the country to a much more democratic situation. But equally, what is important is something what we will do between the elections. Between the elections, elected members of parliament, they are exercising their mandate given by its people. Okay. So now the place moves from the country to the parliament, okay, in National Assembly, and also the Senate. Okay. And there should be, at least as my based on my understanding about democracy, there should be a libel, very much more discussions and debate on the major issues of the country, and that and also the creating and establishing laws, and also the forming policies, and so by doing so, I believe that the democracy will consolidate in Pakistan. And there are two more topics. And apart from the social infrastructure and also the institutional infrastructure, actually there's one more thing I would like to propose. Okay? That is emergency response to natural disaster and the prevention efforts. As you know, Japan is also quite vulnerable to natural disasters, particularly earthquakes. And so is Pakistan. Pakistan had a serious and very big earthquake back in 2005. And also quite recently, I also came to know the news that there is another, not that big one, but still with casualties, an earthquake in Balochistan in last October. Okay. And also in the event of such a natural disasters, of course, a lot of people lose lives, and lots of the building collapse, and people's activities will be stopped. Okay. And in such situations, Japan also has quite the experiences in dealing with such situations, and we often dispatch what we call a JDR, Japan Disaster Relief Team, to different parts of the world where natural disasters happens. I think in 2005 also they went to Pakistan as well. Okay. The other day I spoke with the members of JDR. They are doctors and nurses in Japan, and they are so ready, and they are so talented, and they are so willing to provide the medical assistance when something happens. Of course, it is better nothing happens, but unfortunately it happens, and we do not know when it happens. So of course, when it happens, we are ready to provide emergency response, but also at the same time, we need to, even before something happens, we need to talk about how we can prevent or how we can minimize the effects of the natural disasters. So this is something that we can do, we should do, when nothing happens. And finally, in concluding my talks, I would like to point out that sustainability is the key. Okay? Like SDGs, it is Sustainable Development Goals, but this is the word, this is the concept that applies to every aspect of the cooperation between Japan and Pakistan. Okay? Whether it is the physical infrastructure, whether it is the social or institutional infrastructure, or emergency responses and so on, we need to keep this in mind so that we can have a better future and a better partnership between both countries. And thank you so much. And now this is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kazai, for your elaborate presentation. I would like to now invite Ambassador Durrani to please join in the conversation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mahin. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are very audible.
Okay. Thank you very much. And after listening to very impressive presentations from Mr. Kanta Aoki and Mr. Rohi Kasai, I think from the development point of view, nothing is left for me to talk about. However, since I have to speak about the post-Taliban Afghanistan, so it mostly denotes to the obtaining situation in that war-ravaged country. And let me first disabuse many myths about Afghanistan, which we were entertaining when the deadline of 31st August 2021 was set for Taliban's takeover. But unfortunately, or because of the reasons still being investigated and discovered, Ashraf Ghani government melted down on 15th of August. And this also shows that when we want to impose systems from the above, or we want to parachute democracy, so this is what happens. After 2 decades of trying to inject democracy in an ultra-conservative society, the result was that elected president had to flee. And more than that, the institutions which were established through the external help could not sustain. Here I refer to the Afghan National Security Forces. And the United States spent almost $87 billion during the course of past 2 decades on the Afghan security forces. Same is true about Afghanistan's socioeconomic structure, where another $60 billion were spent by the United States. But what you see today is in front of us. Just yesterday, the special representative of the UN Secretary General on Afghanistan, Deborah Lyons, made her presentation at the UN Security Council. And she said that we barely made it through this winter. Otherwise, a big disaster was visiting Afghanistan. We all know that there have been requests for humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan. It has survived. Of course, there hasn't been, luckily, and thank God, we should thank our stars, it didn't happen like that. Of course, still, and the big question, which even Deborah Leon asked again with the Security Council, that unless we deal with the de facto setup in Afghanistan, things cannot be improved, and don't expect that things are going to improve. Till how long the international NGOs, or for that matter, UN agencies, can reach out to the common people at the width and breadth of the country. This is a major challenge. So far, I think Taliban have displayed the patience. They have allowed international agencies. Of course, they cannot do much, because if they stop the aid, or if they stop INGOs or UN agencies, then the people are going to revolt. There's no question about it. But here you have to look at it from that perspective. I can see 3 major challenges. One is that the business is closed in Afghanistan, almost closed. The second tipping point is the rise in unemployment. And third one is the falling levels of poverty in Afghanistan. Of course, these are the cumulative impact. If you have no businesses and unemployment, so you can face that. And so far, World Bank has approved $1 billion, which will sustain the Taliban, the existing setup, especially the humanitarian assistance, till March this month. UN has presented a plan of $4.4 billion. These have been the commitments made to the UN, but so far only 13% of the appeal has been met. So you can see how slow is the process and how it will materialize in the coming days and weeks. Another issue which we so far is actually has not come out, but may perhaps, that is the migration of Afghans. from the country. There are two kind of migrants from Afghanistan. One are those professionals who don't see any future in the country. PhDs are offered just merely $200 salary, which is not enough for them to sustain their families. They are leaving. Second is the common people. Iran, I was in Iran last month, and they told me that so far they have received 300,000 Afghan refugees ever since the fall of the Taliban government. And this influx is ongoing. Pakistan has approximately received 100,000 refugees so far, but these are not the officially recognized refugees. These are the ones who have had the access and they could manage visas, and they are living here on long-term visas. But we should expect that if the situation, these three tipping points remain valid there in Afghanistan, as far as closure of businesses, unemployment rise, and the fall in, rise in poverty, then I'm afraid the situation can worsen, and we perhaps we will not be able to cope up with that. About Afghanistan's own economy, I have had the opportunity talking to Afghan businesses, the chamber people, Pakistan's chamber people. And right now the statistics, rough as statistics are, that the Taliban can generate approximately $4 million per day revenues through customs, which means that overall in a year, approximately they can generate $1.5 billion worth of revenues through customs. They're all 6 neighbors. They are doing businesses. With China, of course, it's not that much because the terrain is so rough. But yes, Bandar Sher Khan and Tirmiz and Turkmen borders are open. So is with Iran and Pakistan. So these business activities are sustaining to some extent Afghanistan's economy. But that is only limited to the Taliban regime. As far as development work is concerned or humanitarian assistance is concerned, that is not under the Taliban control, but they have to provide security for that. One important aspect I want to highlight here is the political and economic sanctions which have been imposed on the Taliban, and to which Deborah Leon had also pointed out that when Taliban are a de facto reality, they are controlling the country, they maintain law and order, there are no big incidents that have taken place, then not just boycotting them or putting them under political and economic sanctions makes no sense. There's a need for a dialogue. So even UN is now counseling the major powers, especially the P5 countries, to have a dialogue and have some flexibility. So this is something which we have to keep in mind. Situation about Afghanistan, when we say, even the United Nations also now agrees that there's a marked drop in armed security incidents. And secondly, related to that is there are also marked drop in civilian casualties. So here, when we talk about ISK or Al-Qaeda, I'm afraid they were present there before 9/11. They were present there during the past 2 decades under the American and NATO supervision. In fact, ISK took roots while the Americans were in charge in Afghanistan. So I think here the Americans will have to take the blame and responsibility how to tackle with them. And in that respect, I think they should have a dialogue with the Taliban, and some kind of cooperation would be recommended. Here since I have been allotted only 10 minutes, so I will keep that restriction in mind. Important factor is the frozen assets of Afghanistan, $9.5 billion. And amazingly, out of that, $3.5 billion have been frozen as a compensation to the victims of 9/11. This is so strange, the reason being that not a single Afghan was involved in the 9/11. And secondly, when you talk about compensation, future compensation, then so far the United States has been unable to prosecute those Al-Qaeda operatives, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and they are still almost after the passage of 2 decades. Their cases have not been decided yet. So here, in this manner, persecuting the Afghan people looks beyond any comprehension. And this also shows the kind of pressure tactics which are being used by the United States and its allies. And this I can assure you, will generate more hatred against the United States than making it a favorite in Afghanistan or elsewhere. So these are the things which they will have to take into consideration. Mr. Kanta talked about suspicions about the Taliban, and they are under pressure because of the Haqqani group, and also he spoke about Daesh and all that. I think this you have to keep in mind, that the situation is still evolving in Afghanistan. And when you also refer to the concept of Pashtun Wali, then let me tell you, I have a paper on that on Afghanistan, but my latest paper is entitled "What Next? Post-Withdrawal Taliban Rule in Afghanistan, Implications for Pakistan and Beyond." I will send it to you and to your other colleagues. Here, I have tried to establish that when you discuss about the Pashtun Wali Code, then I think it has to be dealt in its entirety. We just cannot cherry pick. It was the Pashtun Wali concept that, in fact, made the Americans look like occupiers. It was the narrative, Pashtun Wali narrative, that the Americans could not defend their position in Afghanistan, despite the fact that they were 9/11 victims. And it was the Pashtun Wali code of Pashtun Wali message that Afghanistan is being ruled by the occupation forces, that the incumbent government, whether it was Mr. Karzai or Mr. Ashraf Ghani, they could not defend it. So, in fact, they were declared as puppets of the Americans. This was the narrative which was sold in Afghanistan. So now, if the overwhelming majority considered the American parachuted dispensation in Afghanistan as puppets, so it means it was the Taliban narrative which won the day, which is why that the Afghan armed forces melted down. They were not paid. They were not. Their training was handed over to the contractors who had their heart more into minting money than training the Afghans. And more than that, I think the Afghan ethnic mix-up, as well as Afghanistan's religious and sectarian mix, if you look at it, that in fact also caused the meltdown in the Afghan national security forces. That also needs deep study into that. So here I will stop here, because the situation there is still fluid and it is evolving. And there are prospects that it may sustain, provided there is engagement for Taliban, and they are some kind of recognition is granted to them because they've fulfilled all those factors which any regime which establishes rule of law is in fact accepted internationally. So that would be needed. And I think otherwise, if it goes out of the Taliban's hands, then I think chaos would be a small word as far as Afghanistan is concerned. And it would impact all neighbors of Afghanistan, especially Pakistan and Iran. I stop here. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Durrani, for your remarks. I would like to now invite Dr. Maria Effendi for her presentation. Dr. Maria, are you with us? Okay, well, I think Dr. Maria might have some technical difficulties, so we will come back to her. In the meantime, if we could kindly have Mr. Rafiullah join us. Mr. Rafiullah?
Hello, hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for organizing this insightful discussion and giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts and my recommendations. First of all, I think it has been a very insightful discussion so far. The other panelists have already said a lot, and there is very little left for me to contribute, but here are a few important points that I would like to highlight. And first of all, I think it has been decades now that we have been having this discussion about the great strategic importance of Pakistan and the importance of Pakistan as a potential hub for regional trade, and Gawada port or Karachi port providing connectivity to the landlocked Central Asian republics via Afghanistan. So all this talk about the great strategic potential of Pakistan. I think this is not new. We have been having this discussion for the past at least 30 years. In my intervention, I'll focus more on the realistic sort of prospects of realizing this potential. With the withdrawal of the then USSR troops from Afghanistan in the wake of the Geneva Agreement in 1988, and then the creation of these Central Asian republics, this has remained one of the goals, one of the apparent goals of Pakistan's Afghan policy and Pakistan's policy for Central Asia, to connect Pakistan to the energy-rich Central Asian republics via Afghanistan. 30 years down the road, I think we have a good enough time frame to critically evaluate and analyze the situation and to understand the factors that have impeded the realization of this potential. So that is where I'll begin with and I'll focus on. First of all, I think we cannot harness the geo-economic potential of South Asia and South and West and Central Asia without first ensuring a minimum level of peace and political stability in the region. With that in mind, I think the current situation in Afghanistan, I don't see it remaining stable in the short term or in the immediate future. There are serious questions about the legitimacy of the Taliban regime, both within and outside Afghanistan. There are also serious questions about the ability and capacity of Taliban to ensure the provision of basic goods and services to their own citizens. And most importantly, I also doubt that the Taliban will be able to deliver on their commitments to important regional players like Pakistan, China, that they will not, that Afghanistan, a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan will not be used as a safe haven by militants from these countries. I think the ability of Taliban to contain, the will as well as the ability of Taliban to contain and limit the activities of militant groups like TTP or even ETIM in future, I think their ability and will both are questionable. My worry is that at some point in time, we will start accusing of Taliban. We will start accusing Taliban of playing the double game, the kind of allegation that Pakistan has been receiving from the US, from the previous Afghan government over the past 2 decades. So, and also because the economic situation in Afghanistan is unlikely to improve in the immediate future, I think we might see more, we might see instability and unrest surging in Afghanistan, let's say 2 years or 3 years down the road. This ostensible calm that we see in Afghanistan now, I believe it is a transition phase. Given the questions around legitimacy, given the questions around the inclusiveness of the Taliban regime, and the reluctance of the I'm turning off the video because the internet signals in Quetta are usually very poor. So please accept my apologies for that. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So with these questions about the legitimacy, the capacity of Taliban, both with regards to governance and delivering commitments that they have made with neighbors, I believe instability might resurface in Afghanistan in the next 3 to 4 years. So with that in mind, I do not see, first of all, that the potential of regional connectivity and trade can be realized in the short term. We need a stable, strong, and peaceful Afghanistan to realize the goal of regional connectivity, to realize the goal of Pakistan becoming the hub of regional trade for Afghanistan as well as Central Asian republics. Secondly, I think in order to tap this potential, we also need to discuss and understand Pakistan's own politics. And one of the esteemed panelists has already alluded to this, but I would be more specific. First of all, I think Pakistan will need to bring about a fundamental shift in its foreign policy to be able to harness this potential. And in particular, I would like to point out Pakistan's policy towards Afghanistan and Pakistan's policy towards India. They have a key role. These policies will influence Pakistan's ability to emerge as a regional geo-economic hub. The existing or the policy of Pakistan over the past 3 decades has remained a pro-Taliban Afghan policy. No matter what the government of Pakistan says officially, but for all practical purposes, we have been pursuing a pro-Taliban Afghan policy. And that pro-Taliban Afghan policy has come at a huge cost for us domestically as well as internationally. Domestically, we have faced the backlash in the form of rise of domestic terrorism. Pakistan has lost more than 70,000 people. The economy has suffered. Internationally, we have been isolated from the US to many other important international players. They have been accusing Pakistan of playing a double game. So regardless of going into the reality of these accusations, I think the perception that most countries, most powerful countries in the world thought that Pakistan is playing a double game has hurt Pakistan's credibility and image internationally, and domestically we have paid a a huge price. Moving forward, given the questions about Taliban's legitimacy and their capacity and ability to deliver what a modern Afghan state should deliver, I think if Pakistan continues this pro-Taliban Afghan policy, I don't think it can play the role of an honest broker between various Afghan factions. The non-Taliban factions will not trust us. And that means our ability to deliver peace or to broker peace in Afghanistan will be severely constrained. Similarly, Pakistan will also need to bring about a fundamental shift in our India policy. And by our India policy, I'm particularly referring to the use of Islamic proxies as a tool to pressurize India or to pursue regional strategic agenda. I think we need to say goodbye to this policy once and for all. It has created problems for us in the past. It will create problems for us in the future. And particularly if we have to realize the dream of Pakistan becoming a hub of regional trade, Pakistan becoming a champion of regional geoeconomics, these policies will have to change. We will also need to bring about a fundamental shift in our internal security policy. There is still this perception in certain quarters in Pakistan that the state apparatus has higher tolerance for certain Islamic groups or militants. And the recent example of TLP, the way these protests were dealt by the state in the main heartland of Pakistan in Punjab, indicates that the state continues to have some strategic ambiguity about dealing with some of these more assertive and powerful Islamic groups. I think amidst such a security militarized environment, the prospects of Pakistan harnessing the potential of regional geoeconomics will be very limited. And lastly, I'll also come to the business environment in Pakistan. I see Harun Sharif Saab is here. I hope he'll speak about this as well. Even if we establish minimum peace within Pakistan and Afghanistan, there is a lot more to do to realize this potential of regional geoeconomics. And that first and foremost involves reforming the business environment in Pakistan. The current business environment is not friendly for any private investor or international investor to come in Pakistan and invest. There are security is one factor. There are other factors as well. And these factors include first, the heavy footprint of state-owned enterprises, inefficient state-owned enterprises, and some of these other enterprises that are technically not state-owned, but they are state-owned for all practical purposes. So they have impeded competition. They have these unfair advantages, which sort of discourages private investors or foreign investors to come and invest in Pakistan because they think there is no level playing field. So state-owned enterprises as well as organizations such as FW and others, which are technically not state-owned, but for all practical purposes, they are state-owned. And these are present in most sectors. Then there is this other challenge where private industrialists or private businesses in Pakistan are also in politics. That also creates a hurdle. So they are not state-owned, but because of the deep prevalence of crony capitalism in Pakistan, where businessmen are also in politics and they use politics to extract undue and unfair concessions for their businesses, for their industries. That is also something that we will have to work on to be able to benefit from CPEC or any other regional integration economic initiative. And lastly, and this is, I promise I'll conclude here, I'll stop here. As part of this efforts to reform the business environment, Pakistan will have to work a lot on our sort of domestic revenue mobilization, as well as these great inefficiencies in our energy transmission sectors. I think if we are able to undertake and implement reforms in these sectors, and if we are able to create a genuine level playing field for private businesses and foreign investors, and if we are able to establish durable peace and stability within Pakistan, and contribute to peace and stability in Afghanistan as well. Only then we can think about, and we can work on the idea of Pakistan becoming a hub of regional geo-economic initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cocker. I would like to now invite Dr. Maria for your remarks.
Thank you very much, Maheen. I hope I'm audible now.
Yes, you are audible. Yes,
Thank
yes, you are.
Thank you very much. I am extremely grateful to Islamabad Policy Research Institute for having me over with and sharing this prestigious panel on the subject matter. Since it's very unfair for a professor to speak about the subject within 10 minutes, so I would not be indulging myself. I would not be discussing the deeper details chronologically and historically about Pakistan-India relations. Let me share my screen here, my presentation here. Okay. So there are 3 points that I would like to make. That is, in the first few minutes, I would be talking about India-Pakistan relations under the prism of mutually hurting stalemate stage, which is an academic side to discuss where India and Pakistan should have seized the moment, the right moment to develop better relationship and improvise to resolve the conflicts. In next few minutes, I would be assessing Kashmir conflict, whether it whether it qualifies to be called as a genocide under UN Genocide Convention, which was promulgated in 1948. And finally, I would be talking about Kashmir conflict resolution. So what is mutually hurting stalemate? That is a concept which is given by Professor William Zartman. And when conflict actors realize mutually and reciprocally that they have given enough time, they have given enough energy, they have lost quite a lot during a conflict, there comes a time that this realization pushes them to realize the moment and begin with some negotiation or initiate a peace process. Now, when we talk about MHS in Pakistan, where do I see it? During Lahore Declaration and composite dialogue. So before Lahore Declaration, Pakistan and India became nuclear deterrent, and that pushed them to realize the moment that that going on and continuing with the conflict and hostile environment would bring them nothing but a total disaster and devastation. So that MHS, that mutually hurting stalemate, pushed them to initiate a dialogue in Lahore, when the two leaderships sat together and signed various memorandum of understanding, agreed on various confidence building measures, and then signed Lahore Agreement in February 1999. Unfortunately, that did not go on for a longer period of time. That confidence that was, or trust that was momentarily built in 1999, February, it could not lead towards a sustainable peace dialogue later on, and Kargil warfare came into play, came into the scene. The second time India and Pakistan realized mutually hurting stalemate stage, it was 2004, when in 2001, December, from December 2001 till January 2004, the two countries were locked into a military deadlock for 2 years, 2-3 years, and then they realized that they should go on with some peace process. And then they started and initiated composite dialogue, which went on for 4 years. There were various meetings held between the two countries at several levels, from foreign minister to foreign secretary level, to technocrats, to track 2 and track 2 and track 3 diplomacy. And finally, it also ended, unfortunately, it discontinued after the Mumbai attacks in November 2008. From 2011 till 2019, we do not see any major breakthrough when it comes to Indo-Pak relations. Now, at the moment, at present, Pakistan has emphasized much in its national security policy 2022-2026 on the better harmonious bilateral relationship with India based on bilateral trade and economic diplomacy. But when we look at the other side, we do not see any kind of encouragement to hold dialogue. So how to achieve right moment now? There are few hurdles that I would be outlining. Cultivating readiness for India to hold dialogue. For past many years, and the current government of Pakistan has extended proposals several times to Indian leadership to hold dialogue, which India did not pay any heed to. Cultivating readiness. So right moment is there. It's been 74 years, India and Pakistan have been locked into this hostile environment, and there's nothing encouraging after this. So cultivating readiness for India to hold dialogue is the first and foremost prerequisite to begin with the discussion on conflict resolution over Kashmir. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's internal policies against Muslim minority, especially in the overall setup of India, as well as in Kashmir, that already talks volumes about the lack of willingness on part of Indian leadership to hold dialogue with Pakistan over Kashmir. That is the major hurdle. Then this continuous Pakistan bashing for the past 2-3 years. From 2019, we have been seeing India has been playing a role as an aggressive neighbor in terms of interfering in Pakistan's internal issues, as well as Pakistan bashing to win its own elections inside the country. So these are the 3 hurdles. Now coming towards Kashmir conflict, I'm going to assess it under UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which was signed in 1948. In Article 2, there are 5 conditions which talks about genocide, and 3 of them are very much there in Kashmir conflict. Killing members of the group. Number 2 is causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Then number 3 is deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Number 4 is imposing measures intending to prevent births within the group. And number 5 is forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Now, India signed this convention against the crime of genocide in 1959. India is signatory to it. Very recently, though I'm not going to cover the entire 74 years of Kashmir conflict, but from 2019 till 2021, there has been continuous killing of Kashmiri civilians and freedom fighters, and there's no end to it. Secondly, by not providing enough, by not tackling the problems of pandemic and COVID-19 within Jammu and Kashmir, it is already a sign towards genocidal attempt that India as a government is not providing enough sufficient health care. There are not a good number of ventilators in different parts of Kashmir, and there's no enough and sufficient health care which is provided to them. So COVID-19 is one thing, but the continuous killing of Kashmiri civilians and freedom fighters by Indian Army is a case in point. Another condition number 2, which says causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group. That is what I would like to talk about, the demography, the Muslim demography, which has been changed in past 2 years. The new domicile law, which was promulgated in May 2020, there were 4 million domiciles given to non-Kashmiri residents, out of which 55,931 domiciles were given to Hindus and Sikh, those refugees who migrated from Pakistan to India in 1947 onwards. There are 3,000 domiciles which are given to Valmiki community and Gorkhas from Nepal. That already gives a lot of identity crisis to indigenous Kashmiris within Jammu and Kashmir. And not only that, it alters the demography in the region, which automatically lessens the claim of Muslim community over Kashmir. So there's a lot of job insecurity. There's a lot of identity crisis within Kashmir going on. Number 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. There have been painful security lockdown, which led towards economic loss worth of $7 billion within Kashmir. 500,000 Kashmiris have lost their jobs in these 3 years. Land rights have been taken away from people in Jammu area. There's constant curfew, internet information blockade. There's a continuous ban on Eid and Friday prayers, house arrest of local political leaders that have been going on since 5th August, since abrogation of Article 370 and 35A, which was done by India in 2019 on 5th August. Now, when we talk about Kashmir conflict resolution, it's very easy to write about it or to see it in papers, to see it in academic literature, but it's one of the most complicated conflicts in the world. There is a model which is known as problem-solving decision-making model, which gives us a leverage of a step-by-step piecemeal approach. Since it's a complicated, a historic, a blood-filled conflict for the past 74 years, and I consider it even a 2-century-old conflict. I do not see its roots only in 1947. I see Kashmir conflict's roots, the indigenous one, that comes from 1846, the Treaty of Amritsar. So there are 4 stages to problem-solving decision-making process. Number 1 is conflict diagnosis. Kashmir has to be defined and diagnosed in its true essence, not through the interpretation of what India talks about. So Kashmir has to be diagnosed as a conflict and identified with a single definition on the basis of human rights violation of the indigenous community. Number 2, this step number 2, phase number 2 is most related to identifying and selecting alternative solutions. What are the alternative solutions India and Pakistan have to present and to think about to resolve Kashmir conflict amicably? Most importantly, giving some relief to Kashmiris who have been victim of war and violence for the past 7 decades. So they deserve peace. So what alternative solutions do we have? Is it related to maximum autonomy? Is it related to self-governance? Is it related to conducted under UN auspices within Kashmir? What alternative solutions do we have? Number 3 is assessment and evaluation of mutually agreed solutions. But that requires a continuous dialogue between India and Pakistan. In fact, among 3 parties to the conflict, India, Pakistan, and Kashmiris. We cannot find out a solution by ourselves and not engaging Kashmiris in that. So assessment and evaluation of mutually agreed solutions should be the 3rd step towards bringing sustainable peace to Kashmir. And then finally, excuse me. And finally, making a commitment towards an alternative in decision-making to implement it. Now, this is 4-tier formula for any protracted conflict, protracted social conflict such as Kashmir. Now, coming towards the role of India and Pakistan. So when we look at the two countries in the broader and greater framework of South Asia, India and Pakistan are considered as regional giants. They need to come up with solutions to all problems within South Asia, including regional problems, such as Afghanistan, such as Kashmir. Kashmir is the major conflict. So having two conflict zones, two active conflicts and violent conflict zones in the region already poses a lot of problems for regional connectivity, regional cooperation, prosperity, and peace. It's the high time for the two countries to resolve their issues in conflict, including Kashmir, peacefully, and support other areas such as Afghanistan in best possible manner. I hope I did not take much time. I would end here. Thank you very much, Maheen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maria, for your presentation. We will now move on to our discussants. If I could kindly call and request Mr. Haroon Sharif to please take the floor. Mr. Haroon Sharif, are you with us? Oh, yes, there you are.
Now I'm with you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for organizing this useful and timely discussion on the regional developments linked to Afghanistan. I would focus my comments mostly, as the worthy panelists have raised, the issues of development and economics linked to the post, this transition which is going on in the region as a whole, but in Afghanistan in particular. So my first point to start with, just to set the stages, and which is cross-cutting to what people have spoken, that Southwest Asia, I'm particularly choosing the word Southwest Asia, not South Asia as general, is going through a major transition. And this transition basically is linked to the realignment of global politics. This is linked to connectivity led by Belt and Road Initiative of China, which Pakistan is part of it. The change of government in Afghanistan. There are changes happening in the Middle East, particularly Qatar, Saudi Arabia. So the whole region is actually managing a transition at the macro level, macro geopolitical level. The good part in this transition, as I see as an economic policy person, that most of this transition, the solutions are looked from a lens of economics. For years and years, the solutions to the region or the region has been reviewed with the lens of conflict. So what we see here is that particularly, this whole China has put money behind this, connectivity. And as Pakistan security policy, I have been very closely engaged with Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the Emir of Qatar. They all are talking about stability, economic prosperity, shared prosperity, complementarity. What we call in economics is that there are, if I look at into theoretical perspective, so there is a talk about an emergence of a new economic geography, which is not necessarily an offshoot of globalization, which is mostly linked to regionalization and using proximity as a tool to achieve economic prosperity and complementing, your. So this is the context in which I would like to make my, comments. Now, different countries are looking at it differently, and frankly speaking, for years and years, people in Afghanistan and Pakistan and the region have seen violent conflict. So switching it to geoeconomics, there is no push button. That's my message number one. Because lots of people talk about Pakistan becoming a trading hub, a connecting place. These things will take time. But first and the foremost, we need to understand the economic dynamics of the region and Afghanistan and Pakistan better. So I would like to highlight few points, starting with Afghanistan. This is a poorest country, from the 7th poorest from the lower side in the world we are talking about, with a per capita income of less than $500 in 2020, which has gone down. It's been mentioned that it's ethnically diverse, landlocked from all sides. But if you look at the estimates after the transition, the economy is likely to shrink up to 30%. So what we are seeing a very clear decline in Afghan economy in 2022-23. This is an economy basically which comprised almost 60% of the economy was thriving on services. And those services were primarily donor driven. So with the withdrawal of these services, there is a major gap of jobs, a major contribution to the economy. We also need to realize that only 1/3 of the budget of Afghanistan is covered through internal resources. So we were looking at an economy which is supported almost 70% or 75% through external flows for almost 20 years. So there's a dependent economy. Also, the exports of Afghanistan cover only 12% of the revenue when they need to pay the import bill. So where would that money come from? 80% of electricity is imported from neighboring countries. Essential food items are not sufficient to meet the 40 million people living in Afghanistan, so they are imported. India and Pakistan are the largest trading partner, in terms of exports of Afghanistan. We also got to see, which I think not many people mentioned, that illegal economy is almost 11% of Afghanistan's GDP. Opium is almost 12% of exports of Afghanistan as of today. So that is where you stand when we look for solutions or partnerships or the impacts. First, we need to go deeper into the economy of Afghanistan, where almost 70% of the jobs are created in the agriculture and rural sectors. For most of the people and analysts, Afghanistan is limited to Kabul and Jalalabad, which is not the reality, because majority of the people earn their livelihoods in the peri-urban or rural areas. Now, with this background, it is important to understand that where does Pakistan stand? Because this is what the topic of the seminar. There have been comments made on Pakistan. So I would only highlight 2-3 challenges. This regional connectivity and everything will only come into, we got to see that unless and until the structure of Pakistan's economy changes, it will be difficult to create jobs for 2 million young people coming in the labor market every year. The structure of economy at the moment cannot produce, if you look at 30 years of GDP growth of Pakistan, it remains slightly lower than 4%. What Pakistan needs is a consistent GDP growth of 7 to 8% for 10 years. Now, there is a very clear structural flaw, and I will just comment on 2 things. Our investment to GDP ratio is 15%. In ASEAN, the investment to GDP ratio is 30%. So we are reliant on money either from the taxpayers' money, whatever collection comes up from this structure is actually spent on running the state. Our development and other spending is done from borrowing. Now, that is the structure I'm trying to explain, which needs to change. There's very little improvement in the past 30 years of investment flows. that has remained stagnant at less than 15% of our GDP. So unless and until Pakistan increases its investment to GDP ratio and directs that investment to two particular areas, we need our fault line in economy is basically our current account balance. Whenever we grow, our imports grow, we can't pay it, we don't have dollars, our exports don't match up, and we go to IMF. You know, it's a very sad story that Pakistan has gone more than 20 times to IMF. And that's a question to IMF as well, that what has IMF program done, because Pakistan has failed to sustain its economic momentum. So when we talk to Japan, we need to look at a partnership which can help us improve the structure in two ways. Number one is Pakistan's productivity is very low, and we need Japan's knowledge and technology partnership to improve productivity. Unless productivity goes up, we can't even feed Pakistan's population. The exportable surpluses are the second thing. Second part is that investment is needed in our comparative advantage areas like agriculture, areas like information technology, emerging technologies, areas like value-added textiles. And that's where I'm afraid over the years, Japan's footprint in Pakistan has reduced, and China and others and Koreas have taken that place. And there is a great level of respect between Pakistan and Japan, but in terms of economic transactions, the volume of Japan over the years is towards a decline. And that's what I would like, my Japanese colleague to think about carefully. Now, unless Pakistan does that, and Pakistan's reliant on a multilateral system, which is, whether it is the World Bank system or IMF or FATF, is so high that, Pakistan's negotiation power in the region is actually driven by these institutions most of the times. Now, with these two economies, when we look at Afghanistan and Pakistan's situation, the good part, which I said, was that both countries are keen to look at economics as a tool to move forward. Now, in Afghanistan, what are the endowments which can be exploited actually to give hope to the youth there? To me, my colleagues have mentioned a number of risks, linked to migration, links to, conflict, links to drugs, terrorism, Taliban's not, giving rights to women. But the fundamental thing is that how can the Asian community, I'm very carefully choosing the word because I think West has walked away. So how can the Asian community help Afghanistan? There are three endowments. One, as I said, that 70% of the people rely on agriculture-related jobs. That is I'm not talking about humanitarian, much has been talked, but if we need to give hope, we need to come up with some skills, with food for, work type programs, small scale infrastructure to build their productivity so that their reliance on import of essential items. Afghanistan even imports wheat and, cooking oil from Pakistan. So one needs to look at, and Pakistan, by the way, at the moment is a net importer of food items. So we cannot continue supplying these things. So productivity in Afghanistan needs to go up. People talk a lot about, connectivity. I don't think any, investor or people will look at connectivity unless and until stability comes in the region. Because security is the fundamental aspect of connectivity. What is the good use of roads if you cannot drive on those? So we need to, I would take it in the medium to longer term perspective, but we need to create jobs for Afghan people. We need to add value to the exports of Afghanistan. We get very raw, vegetables and fruits from Afghanistan. And when I was the minister in cabinet, I had recommended that in our one of the economic zone in the West, Rashakai, We should create incentives for adding value to Afghan products. You know, the packaging, the storages, the marketing, the branding, even, you know, some other processing. And that's where Japan can play a role in terms of why can't we create an economic zone which can actually give hope, which can bring in, you know, people from Afghanistan for training, the skills, the value addition to things, and you take it, you know, forward. And the long-term endowment which Afghanistan has is minerals. Why I'm saying long-term is that lots of people have talked about the $3 trillion worth of resources in Afghanistan. But for that, you need a very extensive locomotive systems and logistics and skills to reach out. That is much, much longer term if we need to take it forward. I'm very pleased that, you know, one of my friends from Japan has spoken about SDGs. That is something I have just, with Pakistan's foreign minister, launched the first ever report on leveraging private capital for SDGs for Pakistan. And that is something which I'm keen to, you know, just comment. I think in terms of, you know, very practical solutions, human development is at the core of Afghanistan, because the Taliban regime does not have the skills to actually manage that particular economy. Now, you cannot export those skills, but you can partner in a way, whereas the challenge of recognition remains major, because there are now, for instance, there are major recommendations for improving the transit trade, but unless Taliban are recognized, Pakistan cannot sign anything. Now, so we need to look at somehow in the humanitarian framework to facilitate this thing, whatever I'm talking, unless a group of people, no individual country will accept or recognize Taliban government. I think a group of countries need to lobby and, you know, come up, and regional countries to start with. So on SDGs, my only comment is that there are two kinds of, you know, people do not get hope while listening to people like us or talk. We need to look at transactions. Now, for instance, if Japan and Pakistan can come up with a human development fund for the Pakistan and Afghanistan, now that is a transaction, because that fund can, you know, give hope to the youth of Afghanistan, and one can target on the border areas and do that. Now, that is a transaction which UN will welcome. Deborah Leon very closely works with me. And, you know, there would, at this point in time, there is no money for human development because you're looking for emergency aid only. So if you need to give people who are trying to migrate or run out, if they get hope and they get a decent job somewhere, so that is one. But more important is, because, you know, the discussion on the soft infrastructure also went on, we also need a technical assistance fund for Afghanistan. Because there are people in Afghanistan, but they need to be trained, they need to be linked up, that how to manage the money, how to manage the transition. So these are the two things which, you know, under the humanitarian setup, which are very doable, which will be appreciated. The UN system is working, so one could use. I know lots of international NGOs have, you know, left. So my practical things are these priorities. Now, in terms of Pakistan's SDGs, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that Pakistan will not achieve the 2030 agenda. Pakistan needs 16% of our GDP as investment in to achieve SDGs. We invest less than 2%. So now the question is that how do we prioritize? And in the current structure of economy, we'll be living in fool's paradise to think that the tax collection will double. Now, that's a longer term agenda. But Pakistan has prioritized. For instance, Prime Minister is very closely pushing the climate resilience agenda. And that's where Japan can come in, because at the moment, Pakistan does not have money. Mind you, I have given it before. Our money comes from borrowing, and Pakistan's debt to GDP ratio has crossed 80%. We do not afford continue borrowing for development. So Japan can come in. The private help us with guarantees to raise capital from private impact funds. So 3 areas: climate change, information technology, health and education, and the 4th one is agriculture. That is the priority of the Prime Minister of Pakistan, where Japan and Pakistan could have a very meaningful partnership. Now, in the closing, my submission is that for the short-term economic revival of Afghanistan, we need to come up with small transactions. These pipelines like TAPI, or when I was the director in the World Bank, I had planned this CASA 1000. That is not going to happen because no international contract will be able to work in Afghanistan under the sanctions regime. We need to look at very small connectivity things like Jalalabad to Torkham connectivity, or or Kabul to Dushanbe connectivity, or Gwadar to Afghanistan connectivity, some small hydropower projects on the Kabul-Kunar River. Now, these are the things which are environmental friendly, that will enhance things and link up, will create jobs for Afghanistan. Looking at these mega pipe dreams that it will connect Central Asian resources to Pakistan, that will take good 30 years from now. So my urge to the participants is that let's be realistic, look at doable economic transactions, create some funding mechanisms and governance mechanisms which gives hope to the region. And my closure is that if we are getting into a century of rising Asia, stop relying on the West and basically put our hands together with the developed nations in Asia to come up with our own development delivery system. We are still reliant on a multilateral delivery system. We can very easily, much cheaper, more transparent, more effective delivery of human development system if we put together certain mechanisms here. So with these some thoughts, I once again welcome this dialogue and wish everybody lots of luck. And I hope that, some practical applied solutions are taken forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sharif, for your remarks. I will now like to call our last speaker of the day, Mr. Abubakar Siddiqui, please.
Thank you. Thank you, IPRI, for inviting me, IPRI and the Embassy of Japan. My apologies that I live in a very different time zone, so I'm behind Pakistan Standard Time. I couldn't participate. I couldn't listen to all the valuable presentations. But I agree with much of what Harun Sharif said, but I think in Afghanistan, we have an immediate problem. The immediate problem is that in Afghanistan is suffering from an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, and I'll talk about the magnitude of that crisis, what makes this crisis, and how some initial steps can improve the situation in the country. So there are a few key things to remember about Afghanistan. Afghanistan is one of the most aid-dependent countries in the world, and it's not. It didn't start in the 21st century with the American attack or invasion. It started in the 19th century with the creation of modern Afghanistan, when Amir Abdur Rahman Khan founded what we know as today's Afghanistan, the modern Afghanistan. He depended largely on a subsidy from British India, which was equal to the money that NATO and the US were paying the Afghan state for Afghanistan's military, which was something in today's money close to $4 billion. So Afghanistan has this chronic dependency on international aid and outside assistance. Before August 15, before the Taliban takeover, already Afghanistan was 75% of Afghanistan's budget was funded by donor funding. 18 million, there was already a humanitarian crisis where 18 million people were already in the need, were in the need of some kind of humanitarian assistance. And then, of course, most Afghans were suffering from the impact of years of drought. So the extent of the humanitarian crisis since August 15, 2021 has worsened dramatically. I'll give you an overview. Today, most Afghans, or more than 55% of population, or 23 million people, are in the danger of starvation. More than 1 million Afghan kids, according to the UNICEF, might be killed because of malnutrition. 82% of Afghans have lost some or most of their incomes. So the majority of Afghans have lost their jobs. Everybody who is working, even the government funding ceased, of course, which was international funding after the Taliban takeover. So the government is not able to pay these people. And then, of course, the healthcare crisis is worsening. Most of the healthcare in the country has collapsed. Education is in a similar, a bit better, but similar situation. And then, of course, the big thing that happened in Afghanistan was that the economy completely collapsed. It had many dimensions. One of the big one was, of course, the sanctions that kicked in after the Taliban takeover. Most of the Taliban leaders, or many leaders, are on UN and US sanctions. So those sanctions basically devastated the economy. And then, of course, the humanitarian crisis is characterized by the large-scale displacement, both inside the country and from the country. More than 1.5 million Afghans have already left their country since August Taliban takeover. Already Afghans were one of the largest refugee or immigrant communities in the world because of 40 years of war. And the country's banking system is really it's close to collapse because of because it has been cut off from the international banking system. In addition to that, Afghanistan is one of the worst victim of climate change or global warming. Already most of Afghanistan has crossed the threshold of 2 degrees heat, which means that the key livelihoods in Afghanistan, agriculture, animal husbandry, they are threatened by these changes. Afghanistan, as you know, the geography, it's characterized by the Hindu Kush mountain range, and most of its water resources come from the winter snows on those mountains. So Afghanistan, in this sense, is already the world's most dreadful humanitarian emergency. But this humanitarian emergency, whatever little help or little steps were taken to address this, is being overtaken very quickly by the crisis in Ukraine. I've written a feature, which will be published later today, and I've elaborated on this issue, that how quickly the Ukraine crisis in Europe has overtaken Afghanistan. Already most of the donor attention is focused on Ukraine. Already more than 1 million Ukrainian refugees have crossed into neighboring European countries. We recently have some silver lining. Some things, there are 2 things that happened in recent days which are good for Afghanistan. One is that the World Bank has given Afghanistan some money. It has from the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund. The World Bank is likely to give Afghanistan $1 billion, which will be used primarily through UN agencies to pay for healthcare workers, teachers, and others, which is a good thing. And then the US Treasury Department has issued a journal license. The journal license means that normal trading activities, banking, a lot of that, it will help with resuming those activities, which was a big problem. Now, there is one critical misconception I think that we need to talk about, which is Biden's February 11 executive order. I'm a journalist, so a lot of the media reporting about that executive order was that it split the money between the 9/11 families and the humanitarian needs of Afghanistan. But I think the reality is very different. $3.5 billion out of the $7 billion mentioned in that executive order, which were with the U.S. Federal Reserve in New York, are being given to humanitarian causes in Afghanistan. There is a separate account. They've been put in a separate account. The remaining 3.5 billion that were supposed to be given to the 9/11 families, that's a more complicated issue. They are basically not immediately being given to the 9/11 families, but this money is being saved, is reserved because of court judgments. But the reality is that the US federal courts are unlikely to give that money to the 9/11 families because the litigation is about holding Taliban responsible, and Taliban so far have not been recognized by any government. And so the Taliban cannot, the money that was deposited in the name of Afghan state, Afghan central government, that cannot be given to the 9/11 victims because of whatever alleged actions the Taliban might have taken or whatever the previous judgments might have said. So there is also some silver lining in that Afghanistan eventually will be able to use those funds. Now, the main point in my presentation, what can we do? How can this humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan be solved? What immediate steps can be taken? I think the basic point is that overall, there is no alternative to state building in Afghanistan. Afghanistan can only survive if there is a functioning state in Afghanistan. And for that, the path is a political path. I think the Taliban have sought legitimacy, but there are a few things that if those happens, I think they might be in a better state. One is that the Taliban have now promised that they will let all students, which include teenage girls, to go back to school in the new school year, which begins on March 21st. So that's a very important date to look at, to remember. If all Afghan children can go back to school, and including teenage girls, that will perhaps boost the Taliban chances of claiming that they made these promises to the international community and they have delivered. The other thing is that the Taliban have so far failed to take steps to get domestic legitimacy. They have not held a lawyer jirga. They're even not talking about the Taliban. So the Taliban have to come up with some kind of a political process which gives them domestic legitimacy. And as Karzai and others have argued, this will pave the way towards for them to get international legitimacy. So I think already the Taliban are talking about some kind of holding a political event in April, which will, of course, they will invite people who are non-Taliban Afghans to participate. But that's, again, a very long and complicated thing to undertake. The third main thing is counterterrorism. Pakistan, including Pakistan, I think the entire international community wants the Taliban to deliver on its counterterrorism pledges. In the short term, there are a few things that can help with the sanctions, with the addressing the humanitarian situation. One is that that the media, the humanitarian community, people studying Afghanistan, the think tankers, we all need to keep a focus on the humanitarian crisis, which is in fact turning into a humanitarian catastrophe, so that international attention can still be focused on the crisis in Afghanistan, and it's not entirely diverted to Europe, to the crisis in Ukraine. That's a very important thing that we can all contribute to. The second thing is that there is a need to rescue the banking sector in Afghanistan. Afghans should be able to send money, to send remittances, aid. Even aid agencies have not been able to send money to Afghanistan. There are many. I was talking to one NGO, the Swedish Committee of Afghanistan. Some of these NGOs have millions and millions of dollars already in the Afghan banks, but they cannot withdraw those. Many NGOs cannot send more money. So this is something that's critical. And then, of course, the international community, the US in particular, they have to think about more sanctions relief. I think the international community, led by countries like Japan, that really attract a lot of respect and are seen as neutral actors, they can lead this effort of coming up with solid recommendations that should eventually open up the Afghan economy, that should help the Afghans in recreating their state, a state that all Afghans can relate to, a state that all Afghans can live in and contribute to the future. But and my final thought is that for countries like Pakistan that are basically part of this crisis, they are not immune from the humanitarian crisis. I think it should be much higher on their agendas to attract global attention and come forward with practical solutions and roadmaps and practical steps that they can help in, or lead initiatives that they can lead in helping Afghanistan in this difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Siddiqui, for your remarks. We will now move on to our question and answer session. However, due to time constraints, we're going to have to keep our question and answer quite short. For that, I would like to first ask the question. We got a question from a researcher here in Pakistan. We have China's presence in Afghanistan is bound to increase, either because of a shift of American geopolitical realities or because of its own aspirations of connectivity. How would you think that Pakistan and Japan are expected to react to this, given Japan's own economic investments in Afghanistan? Perhaps Mr. Kenta and Kasai, we can start with you.
Right. Well, from the view of the global shift or international order, the US started to withdraw its military presence in the Middle East because there was too much presence in Afghanistan 2001 and Iraq in 2003, and after the Arab Spring, there was some intervention by the US. So under the Obama and Trump and then Biden regime, there is a shift. So for China, there are several, I think, aspects. One is this geostrategical point of view. That means when there is a power vacuum, Afghanistan has a geostrategical importance. So China is trying to increase its presence. But it cannot be interpreted only from this point, I think. There are several other aspects. One is counterterrorism, because whenever Foreign Minister Wang Yi has a discussion with Abdul Ghani Baradar, there's always a point about preventing the activities of ETIM. So from the Chinese Communist Party's view, this Uyghur Party's activities are threat to the national security of China. So China is thought to want Taliban to not let use Afghan soil to pose a threat to China. Another one is investment. So some media outlets report that Chinese companies started a survey for lithium and rare earths and so on. So this is another point of view. And from Taliban, it is important partner since there is no country which recognize Taliban as a legitimate state. So this is like we have to see from both sides. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Mr. Kenta. Mr. Kasai, would you have anything to add?
Yes. Well, actually, Kenta has already covered and answered, the questions. But if I may add a little bit, well, we should understand, the China's rise, and as China rises, not only Afghanistan, but it tries to exercise its power and its influence in the neighborhood, and well, it is trying to do that. Not only Afghanistan, but also in Central Asia, also in the Gulf and West Asia, and so on, and particularly, on Afghanistan, with the withdrawal of the U.S. from the country, there is a political and strategic kind of vacuum, and that's where exactly the China is coming in and trying to fill it. And if I may add one more thing, as we know, China, although very short, but it also shared the border, the Wuhan corridor. So Afghanistan is China's neighbor, and in trying to build a certain kind of relationship. And I understand that they even started the dialogue with Taliban even before its takeover last summer. Inviting the delegation to Beijing, and starting the communication. So and that's kind of the continuous process between China and Taliban. And also, it seems that the Russia was was interested in getting involved in Afghanistan once again. But as we know, well, Russia seems to be quite busy with their what's going on in Ukraine. So so China, of course, China is a key key player in the current Afghanistan situation. And of course, Japan is watching this situation very, very carefully and closely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kasai. Is any other panelists would like to tackle that question? Because we're only having this
a quick comment
yes.
from my side. I have been deeply engaged with China on the regional issues. My only comment is that China will very carefully study the situation. There will be no rush to fill the space. At this point in time, they have assured Afghanistan that they will import, for instance, China has imported the most number of pine nuts from Afghanistan. So their way of helping is, again, helping them with more trade, helping them, with that. But China does not have a record of a massive humanitarian assistance or, coming up with immediate reconstruction plans. It will take time, and they will see how the situation evolves. That's my only comment.
Thank you, sir. I think we should bring our program to a close here. I would like to thank all of our participants for their active participation. As we approach the end of our session, I'd like to request Acting President Brigadier Rashid Wali Janjua for his concluding remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. And I thank all the participants for a very, very engaging discussion. I think some very useful takeaways from the discourse have surfaced. And the most important is that the structural alignment of Pakistan's economy and Afghanistan's economy need to be properly aligned, and some basic fundamental reforms are in order to reap the full benefits of connectivity. Otherwise, it will remain a pipe dream. Second important thing that surfaced was the possibilities, the trans-Afghan railways, connectivities, and other energy corridors. They are quite promising. And as Mr. Harun pointed out, the $3 trillion mineral resources that we never tire of talking about, it also needs active collaboration of countries that have resources and that have the capital to invest in that. And I think herein comes the role of Japan to probably mull over those issues and engage both with Afghanistan and Pakistan. When the situation improves, I'm sure one day it will definitely improve. And then the economic incentives, and if we are ready and properly positioned with our right priorities on foreign policy front, right policies on economic fronts, only then we can reap the full dividends of this connectivity and peace in Afghanistan. So I thank you all, and I look forward to similar interactions with you once again. Thank you so much, all the participants.
Thank you
very much. Thank
everyone. This brings us to end of our session. Take care. Allah Hafiz.
Thank you. Bye-bye.